Today we're going to be talking about Martin Van Buren's presidency, following on the heels of Andrew Jackson. Look at some of the challenges and very few triumphs, if any, really, of the old little magician's presidency. What you're going to see at the end of Andrew Jackson's term is a clear divide politically. You've got the Democrats who had been Jacksonian proponents, and then an emerging party called the Whigs. Essentially, it's the age-old split of, do you have a smaller government that's not involved economically versus a big government that isn't heavily involved economically? And that's kind of pretty much what this system breaks down. This is what we call finally the second wave of the two-party system. I won't go over this particular chart too much in depth. It just kind of is a quick little overview of each of the two. All right, the election of 1836 itself, you're looking at whether or not the American system, should the government be so heavily involved in regulating internal improvements and regulating our economy, be as prevalent. So what you're going to see here is Martin Van Buren of the Democratic Party going up four Whig candidates. The most prominent here being William Henry Harrison and Daniel Webster, as you can see there. The goal is to force this election into the House of Representatives by throwing so many different candidates at Martin Van Buren. Ideally, it would throw it in the House, and then the Whigs could maybe then get one of their candidates elected president. Van Buren was seen as a successor to Andrew Jackson and someone that had really been his right-hand man, particularly in his second presidency as vice president. Van Buren will win quite handily, and as a result, is going to continue a lot of Jackson's policies, but also will inherit a lot of the mistakes of Andrew Jackson that will boil over into his presidency, the most severe one being an economic downturn. The other thing about Martin Van Buren is he just doesn't have the gravitas that Andrew Jackson did. Jackson was a rock star, so a military hero, and a common man that just rose above his station. Martin Van Buren is short, balding. He doesn't command the presence of a room. Smart politician, great tactician in that sense, but he just didn't necessarily have that charisma, that rock star personality that made people gravitate towards Andrew Jackson. The biggest problem with Martin Van Buren's presidency is this financial panic in 1837. This is going to be the biggest and most severe panic that we'll have of economic downturn up to this point, lasting over 5 years. Couple problems associated with it. With the loss of the national bank due to the whole bank war in Andrew Jackson's presidency, there's no real set system on banking. There's state banks that are issuing their own credit, and also as a result of having to pay a lot of their taxes in gold and silver, aka specie, it's a struggle for a lot of people as well. There's rampant over speculation. People are buying land, they're paying more than they should, and then trying to sell that again at a higher price, particularly out west. That leads to more inflation and also the low agricultural prices, as we are starting to have a surplus agriculturally and less demand. Also, internationally, there's less demand abroad for our goods, particularly agriculture. And so because Europe is struggling, we're getting less money from them. They're less likely to loan us money because they're struggling too. So you add all of these things together and you have the recipe for one terrible economic downturn. It leads to mass unemployment, a decline in construction of a lot of the roads and canals that our states had been trying to put together. And this becomes a huge problem for our country throughout Martin Van Buren's presidency. The criticism is that the Democrats didn't do anything. Their laissez-faire approach to economics was hoping that they hoped the market would regulate itself. It didn't. And instead of playing the waiting game, people wanted to see more action. And it's going to be one of the reasons why Martin Van Buren will not be reelected for president. And it's this laissez-faire, this kind of hands-off approach to economics, thinking the market would regulate itself, that dooms the Democrats here. It's not just the panic of 1837. There's also the question about what to do with the national bank being gone. Where does the federal government hold its money? The idea here is to have an independent treasury that's going to hold federal funds separate entirely from the banking system itself. But the problem here being that by pulling all the American government's money into these separate treasuries, it's not in circulation. It's delaying recovery because it's not helping to promote exchange, unfortunately. There's also the question regarding Texas. Texas has recently gotten its independence, and as a result, is the United States going to annex Texas? Do we want to add it to our territory? We'd initially promised the Spanish that we wouldn't because of the Adams-Onis Treaty. Well, now what do we do, especially if Texas gets involved in some kind of fight? And so that question will really be addressed in the Tyler presidency, but that is already starting here with Martin Van Buren. And it's also during Van Buren's presidencies that we see the infamous Trail of Tears. While Indian Removal Act had been going on since the early 1830s, the most terrifying moment really when the forced migration of those Cherokee out west will be in 1838 under Van Buren's presidency. We already discussed that in the Andrew Jackson notes. So all these problems pretty much takes us to the election of 1840. Martin Van Buren has struggled a lot. In this time frame, though, he will be going up for re-election as the Democratic candidate up against the Whigs running William Henry Harrison. All right, William Henry Harrison, famed Indian fighter from the War of 1812, and wins a lot of renown at that Battle of Tippecanoe. So what the Whigs are going to do here is they're going to borrow from the Democratic playbook. All right, they're going to try to make William Henry Harrison a man of the people, born in a log cabin. He drinks hard cider. He's an everyday common man. But really, William Henry Harrison was more wealthy, aristocrat, planter style kind of guy. But this election becomes less about political ideology and more about just getting votes. The campaign slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, becomes very prevalent during this time frame. Tippecanoe referencing William Henry Harrison from that battle he won, and Tyler too referencing John Tyler as vice presidential candidate. William Henry Harrison wins in the first Whig victory, so it's changing the guard here politically. We saw, the Federalists, Democratic Republicans, Democrats, and now a Whig president in charge. Is this the reversal of the Jacksonian Revolution, of the idea of the common man era, or just the power of the Democrats? We really tend to see what Harrison's policies are going to be, except for he dies basically a month into office after giving his inaugural campaign. He catches basically a severe cold/flu and will die within about a month. So that leaves John Tyler as the now president of the United States. And we'll see what his actions are in office next.